Hello and welcome to our Syxsense March Patch Tuesday webinar. Today, we have our industry expert, Rob Brown, here to give us an inside look into the newest Patch Tuesday release. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Rob will reach out after to answer those. And with that, I'll pass things over to Rob.
Thanks, Johanna. A very warm welcome to everyone joining us today. If you happen to be in the UK or in Europe, we are in fact an hour earlier than usual. That's just because of the time zone change in the US. But next month in April, we will return to our usual time at 4 p.m. UK time. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Rob Brown. I'm Head of Customer Success at Syxsense, and we've been delivering patch management and vulnerability management services for our customers for over a decade, and we've remediated over 100 million vulnerabilities in that time. And we've done that by using several techniques to select the patches that we can remediate for our customers to reduce the risk as maximum as possible, but without interrupting network or users. So we're going to cover off a bit of news first before we talk about the Microsoft release, starting with something very, very important. Now, we covered this last time and had a lot of questions, which I privately responded to regarding the end of life news for Windows 10 and Windows 11. So if you're still using some of the legacy operating systems, Server 2008 did go end of life this year. There are no updates available for that. Interestingly enough, Windows Server 2012 does actually have additional years of support called an ESU license, but we were actually told that Microsoft is still releasing servicing stacks for Windows Server 2012, even if you haven't subscribed to that extended support. And we have covered servicing stacks in the past, but just to recap what a servicing stack is, it is an update for Windows that allows the operating system and the hardware to work better together. And actually it resets the Windows Update service as well. So it keeps it nice and clean. Ironically, if you don't have the ESU, you can't actually install any of those updates, but nonetheless, they still are detected. And therefore, if you are following a regulation or a compliance standard, then it is probably best to continue to install those servicing stacks. Most importantly, Windows 10. Windows 10 has been around for a very, very long time, and it is eventually coming end of life in 2025. So you have about a year and 3/4 to roll out Windows 11. Windows 11 23 H2 will go end of life in November 2026. So you still have a bit of time. However, if you're using Windows 11 22 H2, which was the original, you will no longer have optional or preview releases for the OS. So last month it did go to end of life, and therefore preview and optional updates are not available. Now, why is that important? Well, preview updates are Microsoft's trump card to see 1 month before an official release if there are any issues. And we do actually appreciate the use of the preview updates. We in fact install the preview updates ourselves because we want to know if there's any issues with the patches that are coming out next month. And those preview updates allow not only the Microsoft's testing team to test the operating system, it also allows hundreds and hundreds of thousands of customers around the world to also preview those updates and to provide feedback about issues that they have experienced. So it's super important that the preview program exists, but since 22H2 no longer has these, I would highly recommend that be your next priority to go to 23H2. Everything I've mentioned here doesn't include the long-term servicing branch. So if you are using those long-term servicing licenses, you actually have probably another 10 more years to worry before you have to worry about upgrading to the next operating system. If anyone is requiring any advice on how to move from Windows 10, Windows 11, and through the feature updates, please do get in touch. Or if you're actually migrating from Windows 10 to Windows 11, it can be done with Syxsense. Just send us a message and we'll send you through some instructions. Now, Caesar did release another interesting announcement that they said these updates should be applied within the next 3 weeks, that a cyber threat could exploit some of these to take control of any affected system. What is interesting is this list is almost the same as last month, and we haven't got any Adobe Reader, and we don't have any Adobe Acrobat updates for the second month in a row in their official release. So it's quite interesting. What I would say is if you are designing a strategy where you're rolling out updates for the operating system, please do not forget to include the third parties. And potentially the selection criteria for third-party updates can be tailored so that if there is a third-party update that is being released by that third-party vendor, not at the same time as Microsoft, that it can be included in a rollout. We actually call these rings. So you might have a Microsoft ring and then a third-party ring where you're rolling out third-party updates maybe a couple of times a month, where you're rolling out the Microsoft updates maybe one time a month. But it's certainly important that all of the third-party updates are included, especially if you have any other third-party applications in your environment, such as Google Chrome. Now, Patch Tuesday was very light. I have to be honest, when we looked at the list and we analyzed the data points, it seemed to me like a lot of IT managers aren't going to have a lot of worry this month. We only have 59 fixes, 2 critical, that's way lower than last month, 57 important. 6 are more likely to be weaponized, and none of them are. None of them are even public aware. We're going to talk more about weaponized and public aware and what it means in case there have been weaponized or public aware vulnerabilities from now until the next Patch Tuesday, because this can change. It can change all of the time. Now, we do have 2 jump points. To put that into perspective, last month we had 12 jump points. Now, a jump point is where a particular vulnerability that has now been fixed with this patch can allow an attacker to exploit a technology outside of the original patch technology. For example, if the original patch was for, say, the Windows file system, Windows Defender, they could effectively attack that original vector, but jump out into another technology, such as PowerShell. And that is where you have a breadcrumb event. So you exploit one particular vulnerability and then you move sideways. We do like to track the jump points because although they do exist, sometimes those vulnerabilities aren't given criticality that justifies the real risk. So in the list, we have highlighted all of the jump points, and I would certainly recommend that if you're rolling out based on criticality or severity, that maybe you ought to include the jump points as well. Now, we have a new winner, so we'd like to track this month to month because depending on the bug type, we have a different risk. And as I said, we've got some interesting data points this month because we don't really have any standout winners. So we like to look at the types of bugs that are fixed because it can help us to make sure we're prioritizing the right vulnerabilities, especially considering we only have 2 critical vulnerabilities to deploy. Now, usually remote code execution is number 1, but it's been beaten this month. And that's for the second time in about 6 months. So this is quite interesting, by elevation of privilege. Now, elevation of privilege is where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to data they're not supposed to have. There is an awful lot of SQL, ODBC, and OLE type updates this month. So I would certainly make sure that you take a look at those and address those if you have that technology in your environment. Remote code execution is used is a classic. It's used by for cyber attacks. So it's executing malware on your system or any kind of code within the network. We have 18 fixes of that particular bug type. Denial of service, that's an attack meant to shut down a system, simply to cause trouble. Information disclosure is when a program unintentionally reveals sensitive information, potentially even passwords. Spoofing, the act of disguising a communication or identity. Security feature bypass, that's when an attacker bypasses the authentication mechanisms of a device to gain unauthorized access. And tampering. Tampering, what does tampering mean? No one really knows. I haven't seen a tampering bug type ever, actually. So we're making an assumption that this particular vulnerability is equivalent to a man-in-the-middle attack. This is actually on the file system. It's not a very high CVSS score, but in this type of tampering attack, a malicious actor could intercept and alter communications between two parties. So I would certainly pay some interest to this because I haven't seen a vulnerability type like this for well over 12 months, certainly not in my recent memory. And it's quite interesting that we do have one this month. Now, how are we going to prioritize? In addition to everything I've mentioned, I like to call these points of interest or data points. Sometimes you get some points that can help you to join the dots to give you a real risk. And like I said, you don't really have any standout winners this month. So in addition to the things I've already mentioned, we're going to talk about these 6 factors that will also help you to prioritize which updates you're going to roll out to your environment this month. For starting with vendor severity. So vendor severity runs from critical, high, or sometimes it is called important, medium and low, and NA. And that's obviously from the most critical to the least critical. And then we have a CVSS score. Now, a CVSS score is a calculated score out of 10 that's based on a number of factors. In fact, jump point is one of the factors that we talked about. The more serious of the CVSS score, which is 10, they're the more critical ones, and it goes all the way down to 0.0. That would be the equivalent of NA. Now, when you put the two together, you have somewhat of a better picture about the severity of a vulnerability and whether or not you should include that. Potentially you want to include more than just one of these, maybe critical and high, for example. Now, some customers are not able to roll out updates all at once. Maybe it's highly distributed, maybe the network is very regulated. So you're not able to deploy everything at the same time. So maybe you want to go with critical and medium and then high in that kind of order. Using the severities really do help you to dynamically select the ones that is going to roll out in those particular schedules. Weaponized state and public aware state means that there's active exploits, and we work very hard with our antivirus partners and with Microsoft to track evidence where a particular CVE has been used in one of these attacks. And where we see that has happened, we track the CVE and then we go ahead and mark it weaponized. It means it's actively being used to exploit and deliver ransomware or other types of attack. Weaponized vulnerabilities do not automatically increase the severity of the vulnerability. In fact, it kind of rarely happens. So having the weaponized on a medium or low vulnerability is quite usual. So we like to ensure that customers that are using Syxsense are able to use weaponized status in order to see which of the vulnerabilities are actually being exploited at any time. Public aware, on the other hand, well, that means it doesn't mean the public is aware of the vulnerability. It means the public is somewhere on the internet. The exact blueprint to exploit it has been published. And we have a lot of white hat friends who are finding bugs in the operating system and in applications, and they are publishing the data to those companies asking a patch to be released. When that vendor doesn't do so, those white hat hackers are able to publish their notes to the internet that will actually say, if you do this and this and this and this on that system, you can actually exploit that vulnerability. Now, not everything that's public aware becomes weaponized. In fact, it's probably only 2 or 3% from this year that have actually gone both public aware and weaponized. But I certainly wouldn't want to be an IT manager that didn't target public aware vulnerabilities just because it's really hard to exploit. So we add public aware status into all of the patches in the Syxsense console. Now, countermeasures is a way of balancing this. So if there is a countermeasure, potentially a mitigation or a workaround, maybe you can apply a group policy, maybe you can change a registry key, maybe you've got a next-gen antivirus. It's really important that you know if a countermeasure can be applied to solve the vulnerability, to effectively mitigate it, you should have that data available so that you can read up and say, actually, if I change this registry key, I can do that very, very quickly via group policy or even via Syxsense. That would be a lot easier than rolling out a 1.5 gigabyte cumulative update. And of course, everything I've mentioned is governed by the exposure. So if you have really serious vulnerabilities that are weaponized and public aware, and it's only exposed on 1% of your environment, but you have lesser severity, but still weaponized on 85% of your environment, then that exposure rule can really help you to make sure you prioritize the updates that are most exposed in your environment and therefore close your risk. Now, if you're not a Syxsense customer, it's perfectly fine. We're going to put everything on our website in a format for you, so you can simply transfer the CVE across to whatever tool set you're using. And if you're a regular, we actually publish everything on our website. So if we go to syxsense.com, we actually have a published article. We actually publish a lot of articles, but this article usually comes out on Tuesday evening in the UK, Tuesday lunchtime in the US, and you'll actually find it from the resources section. So if you follow the resource center here, you can find all of our webinars that we run for third party, for Linux, for Microsoft. You can also catch up on our news where we do a lot of vulnerability announcements and advice and recommendations around patching strategies or testing strategies that you might actually find really useful. Now, as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of updates this month. Only 2 of them are critical, which is great. But we do have 2, which are a CVSS Score 9.0 or above. So we're going to go into those. Now, what is interesting is we have quite a full mixture of affected systems from Microsoft Windows, components, Office, Azure, .NET, Visual Studio, and SQL. There's a lot of updates in the last couple of months for those. So I'm kind of wondering if there's been a major release that they're actually trying to solve and patch. We also have Skype for Windows. Oh my goodness. There have been updates for that. I don't know anyone that still uses it, but if you kind of do, if you're not using Teams yet, you do need to make sure you apply those Skype updates. And Hyper-V, which obviously is the virtual environment for Windows. Now, although we did have no weaponized, no public aware, I still like to do some statistics around the average number of fixes and whether or not it kind of matches the previous month. It gives us sort of the ability to sort of gauge what Microsoft has been doing with these patches over the previous 30 days. Now, the combined CVSS is down on last month, of course, because we have about a 10 or 15 updates less at 447.8 combined CVSS scores, but the average score is 7.6, which actually is up on last month's, which is 7.5. So although we had less vulnerabilities fixed, they were more serious than last month. Now, the first of the recommendations is that Hyper-V remote code execution vulnerability. And this is where you can take the CVE from here and actually in the table just below, you can go ahead and put that into any of your tool sets you're using, and you should target the ones with the most exposure in your organization. Now, this Hyper-V luckily does not have a jump point, and they're the kind of worst kind of Hyper-V vulnerabilities, where you can say jump from the guest to the host, from the host to the guest. In this case, that vulnerability doesn't exist here, which is good. It would require an authenticated attacker on the guest VM to send a specially crafted file operation to the VM itself, to hardware resources on the VM, which could result in a remote code execution on the host server. This doesn't mean moving, it just means you're attacking from one to another, and this could allow the attacker to execute arbitrary code. Now, this is critical. It says there it's important, and it changes all the time. The website is a little bit slower than our Syxsense console. This is a vendor severity critical with a CVSS score of 8.1. Now, its risk, which is the steps that you would need to take to expose, is the attack vector is network, which means any network access, including the internet, could be used to expose this. It does have high attack complexity because you do need to jump technology in this case, but it doesn't require any privileges and it requires no user interaction. So it's very, very serious. If you're using Hyper-V in your organization, please prioritize that, especially on your server estate. Now, the next one is kind of interesting. It's CVE 2024-21334. This is Open Management Infrastructure, OMI, Remote Code Execution. Now, it says customers running affected versions of SCOM, which is the operations manager, not the system center of the Microsoft products. You should update OMI version 1.8.1-0. The vulnerability allows a remote attacker to compromise vulnerable systems. So what is Operations Manager? You're still using physical servers in a rack. You're probably running virtual machines on those servers on top of SCOM. You do need to make sure you prioritize it, and it is the highest CVSS vulnerability of the month, carrying a CVSS of 9.8, which is almost maximum. But take a look at the vendor. The vendor says this is only important. So sometimes you need both sets of data to get an accurate reflection on the actual severity of a vulnerability. The risk for this is attack vector network. Again, any network including the internet, low attack complexity, no privileges, no user interaction, and luckily for us, it has no jump point. And finally, my third recommendation is CVE 2024-21400. This is Microsoft Azure Kubernetes. This is a elevation of privilege vulnerability with service confidential containers. Now, an attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could steal credentials, and that could affect resources beyond the security scope managed by Azure. What does that mean? It means we have a jump point. So that is one of the two vulnerabilities that potentially you could escape from if you were able to expose this particular vulnerability. So you could effectively jump out of one service into another, maybe from one of the groups into another. So extremely serious, especially if you're using containers inside Azure. Interestingly enough, the CVSS is 9.0, making this critical from a CVSS perspective. The vendor severity is important. So it's just another reason why you want to combine the two. The risk for this is network. It has high attack complexity. It is pretty difficult to expose, but certainly if you're using Azure Kubernetes, I would highly recommend you prioritize this anyway. It has no privileges required and no user interaction. Now, all of the other vulnerabilities from the list we've gone and placed in this table down below, along with this with the reference CVE, the vendor severity, the CVSS score, etc. All of this is published here, along with additional notes. So where we've actually been able to collect additional information from Microsoft, we've gone ahead and put it here. Go ahead and print this off. and use it in a steering meeting to prioritize based on the exposure of the CVEs inside your organization. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you do have any questions, go ahead and use this chat function in the corner. Maybe you'd like to join us next time in April, or maybe have questions that we might be able to answer regarding patch strategy or patch testing. And if you're not a Syxsense customer, you can of course use the book a demo in the corner there. And we would love to show you how Syxsense is able to maybe keep your environment a little bit safer than it is at the moment. Until next time, I really appreciate you joining me today. I hope you have a happy March, and until April, happy patching.